Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the Goosebumps Presents TV book series. And this is the final book in the series, book number 18, Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes. Now, I know some of you might recognize this book as one of the rarest Goosebumps books in existence, and that is true. I'm very fortunate to own something like this. Not many people get to experience this book, so I completely acknowledge this. And I might try to make this public some way, some form in the near future for everyone to enjoy, because it's not an archive, and maybe somebody can take it and put it on archive. Do with what you want with it. It's up to y'all. But yeah, this book is very rare. Like I said, not a lot of people get to experience it, and for the most part, this book, like some other TV books that I've read, was quite interesting. See, on here, when I review these TV books, a 5 out of 5 for a TV book would be a spot-on adaptation of the episode. Because for these books to exist to begin with, these books were created as supplements to the episode back in the 90s because of lack of home media release on VHS for the episodes, mainly, or, chancy encounters on reruns and syndication. These were ways for kids to be able to get their favorite episodes, get pictures of the episodes inside of them, and basically get the story without having to watch the episode. So, when I rate these books, I'm rating these as a supplement. A 5 out of 5, like I said, would be a perfect adaptation. And anything lower, we start to get into interesting territory. There are differences from the episode that makes the book stand out and make them worth checking out. And this one does have some differences, and I'll get into that in just a minute. But for the most part, this one's really good. And I'll say this now: if you want this book for your collection and you're a completionist like me, this is going to be pricey, but it is quite an interesting read compared to the episode counterpart, and it's quite fun. So I recommend picking this up if you can afford it. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So, the TV book starts off like the episode. You have Joe and his sister Mindy are throwing a baseball, and the baseball crashes into their neighbor's yard, and Joe has to go fetch it. And Joe gets, confronted by his neighbor named Major McCall. And his neighbor, throughout this book, they reference him as Major, so I'll just call him Major here. Major, he's like this retired military guy, very much like the episode, and he's kind of a jerk. He doesn't want the kids on his lawn or messing around in his rose bushes or in his garden, and he confiscates Joe's ball, and Joe's really upset about this, and his dad comes home simultaneously, and Joe is like, well, now I don't have anything to play with. And then Joe's dad's like, hey, come look in my truck. I got something for the lawn. So the kids go and check it out, and they hop in the back of their dad's truck, and they notice that there's these 2 lawn gnomes there. And Joe is not fond of these lawn gnomes. He's kind of scared of them. I guess I'll bring this up here. The book says that Mindy is 13, which I think in the actual book, Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes, she's 14. So they made her younger, I think. And then Joe is his age isn't explicitly said, but he says he's a year and a half younger than Mindy. So depending on how far along in her 13th year Mindy is, Joe could be anywhere between an 11-and-a-half-year-old to a 12-year-old kid. The episode depicts him as a younger kid, so I definitely think that Joe is on the younger side of that spectrum. He's probably closer to that 11-year-old mark than a 12-year-old. You can just tell. But Joe, he's kind of, the way he's described in this version, he's scared of the lawn gnomes. He doesn't like them. He's not trying to use them as pranks or messing with his sister. He just doesn't want anything to do with them. And his dad's like, hey, we're going to go put these out on the lawn. So they go and put them out on the lawn. And Mr. McCall comes over, makes a harsh comment about the gnomes, and kind of makes the dad look kind of inferior in front of his own kids, which is an inherent problem with the episode. But Joe makes a comment to Mr. McCall, and Mr. McCall's like, I'm gonna keep an eye out on you. I think you would definitely come in my garden and try to sabotage me because, this competition's coming up and you just want to see me lose. And Joe's dad's like, he would never do such a thing. Even though Joe's dad and his neighbor, the Major, are in this gardening competition, Joe's dad sticks up for Joe, like the episode. And Joe's like, you know what? Whatever. Forget this guy. So, later on that day, Joe can't get this image of the lawn gnomes out of his head. And in the book here, there's an added scene that was not in the episode. In the episode, after that scene wraps up, there's a silhouette cut to Joe's room at night, and then you see this scampering through these bushes going over into Mr. McCall's yard, and the next day happens. Here in the book, there's a whole added dream sequence with Joe, where Joe is dreaming, and he's going downstairs, looking out the window, and he sees the lawn gnome staring at him and coming to life, and this petrifies Joe, and then he wakes up from the dream. So that's an added scene that was not in the episode. So, like the episode, though, it carries on from there. The next day, they awaken to Mr. McCall angrily banging on the door, and he's saying that his melons were squished, and one of his melons were drawn on that has, his face on it with ink. And Joe is like, I didn't do this, and Mr. McCall's blaming him, and Joe's dad sticks up for him, and Mr. McCall's like, I'm going to prove that your son is doing this. So he storms off and heads back to his house. So Joe's outside, doing his, doing some stuff, playing ring toss with his sister. And then they notice that there's black ink and a seed in one of the gnomes' mouths. At least Joe notices that. And he's like, can the gnomes really be doing this? So he decides to go investigate later that night. He wants to see if maybe these gnomes are behind this. So he gets this bright idea to go spy on the gnomes. And when he goes and he looks out his window and sees that these gnomes are gone, and he sees beady red eyes. So he decides to go outside and investigate the red eyes, but he thinks they're raccoons. And then when he looks over at where the lawn gnomes would be, they're gone. So he hears some whispering and ventures over into the McCall's backyard. And he sees that these gnomes are destroying his garden. And Joe's like, oh my lord. And unlike the episode where there's just 2 gnomes, like you see on the cover here, in this version, there's a bunch of gnomes that come out of the woodwork. And even the book says there's no explanation where they came from. Nobody knows. So there's a big old, I want to say big old plot hole, but, there's a plot hole there. But these gnomes are wrecking his garden, making mischief, and they catch sight of Joe. And they all all these gnomes, there's like an army of them, trying to ambush Joe. And then these spotlights get triggered, and these gnomes freeze in the light. And Joe is, taken back, and Mr. McCall's like, caught you. And he makes a big commotion, and Joe's dad comes out, and Mr. McCall's like, he is the one doing this to my garden. He wrecked my garden. I caught him red-handed, and Joe's dad looks disappointed, and Joe's like, the gnomes did it. And Joe's like, I don't want to hear it. Joe's dad's like, I don't want to hear it. It had to be you. You're going to be punished. You're going to help Mr. McCall put his garden back perfectly tomorrow, all day, no matter what it takes. And then Joe's dad takes off with the lawn gnomes, and Joe's sent back to his room, and he has to think about the consequences. So the next day comes, like the episode, and Mr. McCall's dressed in his, former military garb, and is forcing Joe to garden and fix his garden and stuff. And Joe's out doing that. And while he's doing this, he has to wheelbarrow some manure over to this patch of soil. And his sister is pestering him from a hammock. And Joe's like, I didn't do it, and I'm going to prove it. So Joe, when he's going in for his lunch, he has to take a lunch break. He remembers that he has a video recorder that he was given as a present. So he now wants to use this to film the lawn gnomes. So he's going to go out later that night and figure out what's wrong. So he wakes up at midnight. he grabs his recorder and he heads to his window, and the gnomes are missing when he tries to go record. So he's like, okay, well, the gnomes are gone. Maybe I can convince my dad. So he goes to his dad's room. His parents are sleeping and tries to wake them up. It's not going to work. Then he goes to his sister Mindy's room. It's like, hey, these gnomes are missing. She's like, I don't believe you. And he's like, no, I'm going to show you. Come with me. So he takes Mindy out to where the gnomes would be, and the gnomes are, in fact, are missing. And Mindy's like, what's going on? And Joe's like, they got up and left. So they go around after hearing some voices in the woods, and they head in the woods, and then they get ambushed by these horde of lawn gnomes. And like the episode, the kids try to run off, and then the lawn gnomes end up catching them both, and are making threats, threatening to squish them, put magic spells on them. But unbeknownst to the gnomes, Mindy had grabbed a flashlight. So there's a camcorder with a light and a flashlight with a light. And the gnomes confiscate the camcorder and start playing around with it. And they also confiscate the flashlight. But during a disagreement with the gnomes, they drop the flashlight, and the light clicks on, and it freezes a gnome. So now that the kids magically realize, especially Joe, after he already seen this before, he's like, well, the light's the reason. We got to get the flashlight. So the kids make a break for the flashlight, get it from the gnomes, and they back away from the woods, and the gnomes are following, but they're trying to keep the flashlight on them to kind of deter them from coming any closer. Then the flashlight dies, and both of them find themselves in the backyard of Mr. McCall, and Mr. McCall comes out, turns the spotlights on again, and all these gnomes, freeze. The two gnomes that they have freeze, and then the rest of the gnomes just scamper off in the woods. And Mr. McCall says, I got you. And Mindy and Joe make a break for it into the shadows to get away from the lawn gnomes. And Mr. McCall's like, where are you going? Come back. And then he bumps into one of the lawn gnomes. He's like, I'm going to take care of these things once and for all. So Mindy and Joe are waiting in the shadows, and they can't see anything because it's dark, but they can hear something going on. They can hear some struggles, some cackling, some grunting, some screaming. They can hear what's happening to Mr. McCall. This is not in the episode, right? Not in the episode whatsoever. They can hear this, and once they hear this going on, they decide to go inside and make a break for it and try to get out of sight from the lawn gnomes. So the next day comes around, and it's the competition. Now, the competition is a bit different from the episode as well. So in the episode, the lawn gnomes are over in this specific part of the yard, and the family's awaiting the final inspection from these, contest people. They're looking over in a corner of the yard, and they see these bushes, and they're cackling about something hiding behind one of these bushes. And when the family's like, oh, you seem like you're impressed. Are we going to win? And the guy's like, we were going to let you win, but there's something over here behind the bushes. So the family's like, what do you mean? And the person calls them over, and they find out what's behind the bush. As in the book, when they go out for the competition, the people are staring at the lawn gnomes, where the lawn gnomes are. And there's something behind the lawn gnomes directly. And the contest people look upset, so the family comes up, and they're like, what's wrong? And then they kind of turn on a smile, and they're like, so does this mean that we're going to win? And they're like, well, we were going to let you win, but there's something here that just feels out of place. So Joe notices that there's another gnome behind the lawn gnomes. And it looks like a metallic gnome of the Major. And he's like, what? And then he looks at the gnomes, and the gnomes are doing something that kind of gives an answer to what Joe was thinking. And offers a different ending, and that's essentially where the TV book ends off. So, I don't know if I mentioned this, but the adaptation of the episode was written by Charles Laser, and this book was adapted for book form by Teddy Margulis. I think that's how you say their name. I'm not too sure. But, yeah, Charles Laser, I don't know if this was an original script or the original idea. It probably was. There feels like there were scenes that were supposed to be in the episode. Like maybe that dream sequence was supposed to be in there, or maybe they thought that it would be too frightening. I don't know. There's some things that on paper would sound more frightening. Like The dream sequence with the gnome staring at him through the window. That's creepy. That's an unsettling feeling, but that can also kind of spoil if the gnomes are alive. So maybe cutting that out would make sense. But then there's the darkness to the climax of the episode that's featured here in the episode adaptation in book form, where the kids can hear what's happening to him. They can hear it, and they're deliberating on whether to listen and then leave or just get out of there. But they stop and listen to what's happening. There's something so morbid about that gets to me on a cerebral level. Maybe that's a little too dark to put in the episode, but that was great. I honestly wish that was in there. And then the ending, actually, the ending I think is handled better in the episode. I kind of like the way they went in the episode. But the ending in the book here actually works too. It surprisingly works well. You have, instead of the big reveal being what's behind the bushes, you can clearly see something is behind the gnomes, and but it's kind of blocked out of view from the contest people. And then when Joe's family goes to investigate, the people move out the way, and directly behind the lawn gnomes is a new lawn gnome that's not supposed to be there. And Joe and Mindy are pretty much the only people that know the truth. That's also pretty dark. But if I had to say, I like the episode's ending a little more, and I think the episode's ending would have still worked fine in this. The only out of place thing that really feels out of place is having these multiple lawn gnomes appear when Joe first meets the lawn gnomes. I feel like there's such a blatant lack of explanation where these lawn gnomes came from. Obviously, there's an implication you can make that they come from other lawns, but that was an evident problem in the episode that's apparently still a problem here. Maybe in the original draft they were supposed to be introduced in the McCall scene when the spotlights first turn on, but then they cut them out to kind of make it a more climax, kind of a surprise. It still feels out of place, but there's enough changes there to make that scene a little bit different. So, yeah, the TV book is pretty interesting. Not as faithful of an adaptation as I've seen, thinking back on something like Attack of the Jack-o'-lanterns or something. That's like pretty much spot for spot script. Here, it's mostly script, just with mild changes, like having multiple lawn gnomes, or having a darker twist in the climax where the kids can listen to what's happening, or having an altered ending. There's even an added scene that was not in the episode with the dream sequence. So it's not all that faithful, but most of the dialogue is faithful, and the story kind of trots along pretty fairly to the episode. It's not something as noticeable like Let's Get Invisible or Cuckoo Clock of Doom's books, where in Cuckoo Clock of Doom there's big, major, significant scenes that are not in the episode. And then Let's Get Invisible kind of has that blend of excessive changes, like they go off script, they change parts of the script, parts of how the plot goes along. And there's also, extended scenes and even added scenes in perspectives that weren't there. So not quite the level of that, but there's enough to make it interesting. So from a 0 to 5-star basis, I'm willing to give this TV adaptation here, on an adaptation basis, about a 4.4 out of 5. It's not quite a spot-on adaptation, script for script. There's enough changes to make it more interesting, which is why it gets a lower score. But not quite as, like I said, as much as like a Let's Get Invisible or Cuckoo Clock of Doom has been. But yeah, still makes it interesting. And in this review series, when I talk about the TV books, the lower the score, the better. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes TV book. Let me know down in the comment section. Did you like this adaptation? Did you hate it? Did you think it was better than the episode? I'm dying to know. If you want to know my personal opinion, I actually like this more than the episode. It's a little bit darker and a little bit more twisted in some parts, and I love it. So yeah, let me know, and I'll see you next time.